Continuing on the seventh order of business, the House has before it the Conference Committee report on Senate Concurrent Resolution 4010. Mr. Chief Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, your Conference Committee report on Senate Concurrent Resolution 4010, consisting of Representatives Casper, Mosier, and Ammerman, and Senators Hogue, Armstrong, and Garbinger, recommends that the House recede from House amendments as printed on Senate Journal pages 1069, adopt amendments as follows, and place Senate Concurrent Resolution 4010 on the seventh order. Mr. Speaker.
Representative Casper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. When the House first received Senate Concurrent Resolution 4010, the bill had some problems with conflict of language between residency, and qualified elector. In our GVA committee, we tried to resolve that issue, could not, and turned it into a study as our committee felt this issue needed to be studied. The Senate received the amended bill and refused to concur. And we had a conference committee of about 4 or 5 meetings trying to come to a resolution to get to a point where we could put something on the ballot. I think, Mr. Speaker, we do have that resolution. So we amended the resolution in committee, and the resolution would now read, and this would be on the ballot, each individual elected or appointed to the Legislative Assembly must be, on the day of election or appointment, a qualified elector in the district from which the member was selected and must have been a resident of the state for 1 year immediately prior to that election. An individual may not be seated in the Legislative Assembly unless the individual lives in the district from which selected. And our conference committee felt this was the best language we could come up with and not really cause too much of a problem in the Constitution and let the people of our state decide how they would like to proceed on this issue. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd move that the Assembly adopt the Conference Committee report.
Is there any discussion? Representative Clemene.
Mr. Speaker, will the bill carrier yield to a question?
Representative Casper, would you yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Clemene.
Representative Casper, the last sentence in this bill on page 2, an individual may not be seated unless the individual lives in the district from which elected. Does this mean that once the individual is seated, he or she can move out of his district and stay in the Legislative Assembly?
Representative Casper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Clemene. That is a possibility. As the language says, an individual may not be seated, and we interpreted that in the conference committee, meaning the day we're sworn in is the day you're seated. So on that day, you must be a resident of your district. However, it does not state that you must live in your district the rest of the time. The reason being, at least in the conference committee discussion, there could be some type of a natural disaster, such as a flood, or a fire or a tornado, which would cause the person to move out of their district for a period of time. So there is a potential that you could move out of your district during the after you're seated, and then come back into your district, because in the next session it says you must live or you must be a member of your district and live in it the day you're selected or you're seated. So, Mr. Speaker and Representative Clemene, there is a little bit of a wiggle room in there, but not too much.
Is there further discussion? Representative Delzer.
Speaker, would the bill carrier yield to a question?
Representative Casper, would you yield to another question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Delzer.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Casper, what happens if they're not seated? Because that doesn't mean you're not elected. Does the constituency end up with one less legislator? Is there anything that would force them to resign?
Mr. Speaker, Representative Delzer, the only way a legislator would not be seated in this body would be that you do not take the oath the day that the Legislative Assembly opens. So therefore, if that creates a vacancy, then we have another provision of the law where the district committee would appoint someone to take that person's place. So that to me is the way it would work if someone were not here to be seated on when you take your oath. Unless, of course, they were hospitalized, couldn't be here that day, and came in later and were sworn in by the Speaker afterwards.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the questions on the motion of Representative Casper to adopt the conference committee report. Was there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The speaker is uncertain. The key will be open for a verification vote. If you vote green, you adopt or vote for the conference committee report. If you vote red, you would reject the conference committee report. The key will be opened. Has every member voted? Representative Mock. Does any member wish to change their vote? Queue will be closed. Record shows 39 yea, 48 nay, 7 absent, not voting. The conference committee report for Senate Concurrent Resolution 4010 is defeated. The House will be on the 17th order of business for announcements.